Way back, at the dawn of time, the plants of the field had yet to arrive. No one was around to till the earth until one day God brought it all to birth. It started that day with a stream of fresh water. And God decided to try their hand as a potter. The water of life turned the ground into mud that God formed into a person of flesh and of blood. God planted the Garden of Eden in the east and made grow all the trees from the biggest to the least. Every tree that is pleasant to look at and eat, God looked at it all saying, "Man, that is sweet." So God took the person, put them there in the garden with all those other things made of hydrogen and carbon. God said, "It's not good for you to be alone. I'll come up with other beings made of flesh and of bone." So back to the drawing board, back to the mud, molding the primordial ooze into flesh and blood. God crafts various creatures, wondrous to see, and God brings them to the person to find out what they might be, to play a part in creation, play a part in the story, to have a role in the equation, the growing inventory, every creature of the field, every bird of the air. As each one is revealed, God brings it right there. God brings these new creatures in a glorious parade to see and find out what it is God has made. "That's an ostrich, that's a bear," the person would exclaim. And whatever word is spoken, that then would be its name. No longer some authoritarian controller of creation, God starts sharing the power of divine determination and conceding this part in the creative operation. God recedes into the background of this whole situation. We continue to play a role in God's creative work with a layer of responsibility we really cannot shirk. Will we stay in relationship with all of God's creation? As sea levels rise, will we rise to the occasion? God, forgive us when we use creative power for devastation, bombing God's garden to a state of desolation, fouling the water and polluting the skies, threatening the earth with sea level rise. May God teach us instead the ways of gentleness. May the pets we know remind us to be more generous as we learn from them the strength of conscientiousness. We recall the tale we find in chapter 2 of Genesis. All the trust God shows for us in chapter 2 of Genesis. Today, we celebrate the blessing of the animals in honor of the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi, who is just about everybody's favorite saint. Francis is remembered for his love of animals and his care for the earth, but also for his critique of the worship of wealth and the worship of war. Born into a rich family, Francis chooses to become poor. Brought up in privilege, he rejects the system that claims the superiority of power and wealth. A professional soldier, Francis turned his back on an enterprise that centers the destruction of those made in the image and the likeness of God, praying in that famous prayer, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." Horrified by the Crusades and the very idea of waging war in the name of religion, Francis travels to Jerusalem to try and make peace with those who were supposed to be his enemies. And it was during a year spent detained and locked away in a foreign prison when he found the grace that freed his soul from hate and violence that was feeding the culture of his day. These days, I'm left wondering, what would Francis say? What would Francis say to us? What would Francis say to a nation that raids peaceful neighborhoods, divides families, arrests children, and deports their parents, What would Francis say? What would Francis say to national leaders that suffer under the illusion that some sort of warrior ethos is what's going to keep us strong and safe? What would Francis say to those who seek political power and privilege in order to accumulate wealth? What would this lover of nature, this patron saint of the environment, patron saint of ecology, say about the ecological devastation caused by greed? What would Francis say? Now, to be fair, tradition also remembers Francis as being a little divinely kooky, preaching to a flock of birds who are evidently spellbound, and one day heading to the hills to negotiate a peace deal with a ravenous wolf who is terrorizing the town. Francis refuses to see the wolf as an enemy, but as a brother, and so Francis stretches out his hand to the wolf in a gesture of peace and retains his hand. And so St. Francis is also a patron saint for animals. And he reminds me that all creatures are precious and all creatures are worthwhile, with the possible exception of pigeons. Which brings us back, of course, to the second chapter of Genesis, to the biblical story of the creation of animals and the role God gives us in naming each of the animals. What strikes me the most about this biblical story is this. God insists that it is not a good thing that this human, God's created, should be isolated and separated, alone. For God, that isolation and separation is a problem, a big problem, a problem that has to be overcome. So God does something about it, as we've heard. God decides to continue the creative process, and more than that, to involve us human beings in that process of creation. God creates all of these animals, like the ones we've brought here with us today, some of us, and creates lots more animals besides the ones we like and the ones we don't like. And when the person God has made still doesn't find a completely suitable companion, God finds a way to multiply us, to make more of us, moving us away from isolation and creating the responsibility of relationship and the necessity of community. God makes us to be together. God creates us to move out of isolation, to resist separation. I know it takes work to be continually creating community and recreating our relationships, when sometimes it's very difficult to create and recreate those relationships. But that is the way that we share responsibility with God for this ongoing process of creation. So remembering that, I would love to end with a little repeat after me prayer. Make me an instrument. Make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, move me to bring pardon. Where there is doubt, let me show faith. Where there is despair, I'll continue to hope. Where there is darkness, I will shine a light. Where there is sadness, I want to bring joy. I want to bring joy. I want to bring joy. Let's keep those words in mind as we bless and celebrate our beloved furry and scaly and feathery friends, these bright and beautiful, these wise and wonderful ones that bring us such joy and light and hope and love. Amen. Let's sing.